Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a close look at a new topic each week. Today we're diving into a true crime case that's really stuck with me.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those cases that just gets under your skin, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the story of Genene Jones.
Oh, Gene Jones, the angel of death.
Right. And it's just so disturbing because she was a licensed vocational nurse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, someone you know whose job it was to care for the most vulnerable patients, infants and children.
Yeah, the thought of someone in that position of trust actually harming those in their care, it's just chilling.
It really is. And the estimates are that she may have killed up to 60 children.
It's hard to even grasp the magnitude of that.
Absolutely. So we'll be looking at a bunch of sources today. We've got some stuff from Wikipedia, a really in-depth article from Texas Monthly, and even a few YouTube videos to try to piece together, what happened. But just a heads up, some of the details are pretty disturbing.
It's heavy stuff for sure.
It is. But, I think it's important that we, look into these dark cases because ultimately it's about learning and understanding how to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening again.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, right?
Okay, so let's start by talking about Genene Jones's early life and see if we can find any clues, any insights into what might have led her down this path.
Well, her early life was kind of interesting. She was born in Texas in 1950 and was adopted.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And before she went into nursing, she actually worked as a beautician. Imagine that, right?
Wow, what a change.
Right. And then in the late 70s, she went to nursing school. Her personal life was pretty turbulent, too. She was married multiple times and had a child from her first marriage.
Yeah, one of the sources mentioned that she even married a 19-year-old nursing assistant right before her indictment.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it makes you wonder, right,
It does.
about the kind of stress and instability that might have been going on in her life at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Those personal dynamics could definitely be relevant, especially when we start talking about her nursing career.
Right, because that's when things start to take a really dark turn.
That's an understatement.
So she starts working at Bixar County Hospital in the pediatric ICU.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And that's when a truly disturbing pattern emerges.
I bet.
A statistically improbable number of children started dying on her watch.
Seriously?
Yeah. It got so bad that the staff started calling her 3 to 11 p.m. shift, the death shift.
You're kidding.
Even not.
I mean, come on. That's wow.
Right. It's chilling.
And the fact that it became like common knowledge among the staff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to wonder why no one spoke up sooner.
Right. I mean, that suggests that there was a lot of unease and suspicion around her.
Definitely. So the hospital, fearing lawsuits, what do? They asked all their LVNs to resign,
Including Jones.
including Jones.
But they didn't investigate further.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know.
I mean, you'd think with so many deaths, especially in such a vulnerable population like that, they would have at least tried to get to the bottom of it.
Right.
And just to clarify for our listeners, an LVN, or licensed vocational nurse, is a nurse who provides basic bedside care under the supervision of registered nurses or physicians.
Oh, thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, no problem. But still, it's just mind-boggling that they just let her walk away.
Yeah, the fact that they didn't do more to investigate is really unsettling.
It definitely raises some serious questions about the hospital's responsibility to protect its patients.
For sure. And unfortunately, this lack of investigation allowed her to move on to another job. This time, it was at a pediatrician's clinic in Kerrville, Texas.
And that's where things really escalate, right?
Exactly. In Kerrville, the suspicions about Jones finally turned into concrete accusations.
Because...
Well, they found something pretty damning. Puncture marks and a bottle of succinylcholine.
Wait, succinylcholine.
Yeah, it's a powerful paralytic.
Oh, wow. And not only that, but the contents were diluted with saline. So someone was clearly tampering with it.
It was a huge turning point in the case because it was the first real concrete evidence that something criminal was going on.
I can imagine. And the use of succinylcholine is particularly disturbing.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Especially when you consider its effects on infants.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a sec because I know some of our listeners might not be familiar with this drug.
Okay, sure. So succinylcholine, it's a muscle relaxant that blocks nerve impulses to the muscles. It's often used during surgery, to help with intubation or to relax muscles.
Okay.
But here's the thing. In infants and small children, even tiny doses can cause complete paralysis of the respiratory muscles,
Wow.
meaning they can't breathe.
Oh, wow.
And that can quickly lead to respiratory arrest and cardiac arrest.
So basically she was using this drug to intentionally make these babies sick.
That's what it looks like.
It's just horrific.
It is. And the diluted succinylcholine, that was just one of the drugs she used. There's evidence that she used others too, like digoxin and heparin.
Oh my gosh. Those are both incredibly dangerous for infants if not given properly. Digoxin is a heart medication and heparin's a blood thinner.
Right. That's right.
So in the wrong doses, they could cause serious problems.
Absolutely.
Internal bleeding heart failure.
Yeah.
It's just awful to think that she was intentionally causing these medical crises.
And what's even more disturbing is that these drugs, when used in small, undetectable doses, can mimic natural complications.
Making it really hard to figure out what was going on at first.
Exactly. It's like she was using her medical knowledge to harm these kids and then covering her tracks by making it look like natural medical problems.
So devious. But how did they finally catch on to her?
Well, it took a tragedy to really spark a serious investigation. The death of a 15-month-old named Chelsea McClellan.
Oh gosh, that's so sad.
Chelsea died suddenly after Jones gave her a vaccine.
That must have raised some serious red flags.
It did. Finally, people were starting to pay attention.
What did the investigation uncover?
Well, for one thing, witnesses started coming forward talking about Jones's behavior around patients who suddenly got really sick.
Like, what were they saying?
They said she was strangely drawn to these situations, like she was almost anticipating them.
That's really creepy.
It is. And then when investigators looked at medical records, they found a pattern of Jones giving unnecessary or dangerously high doses of medications.
Especially drugs that could cause medical emergencies.
Yeah.
Like the succinylcholine, digoxin, and heparin we talked about?
Yep.
So she was deliberately over-medicating these children.
It seems that way.
Knowing it could kill them.
Yeah. It's as if she was using her knowledge of these drugs not to heal, but to harm.
This is so hard to comprehend.
Oh.
Just how many children do they think she might have harmed or killed?
It's hard to say for sure. She was officially charged with the murder of Chelsea McClellan and injuring another child.
Okay.
But she remains a suspect in the deaths of as many as 60 infants and children.
Oh my God. 60.
Yeah. A CDC study found that during a 15-month period at Bexar County Hospital, patients were 10 times more likely to die on a shift that Jones worked.
10 times. That's just unbelievable.
It's a terrifying statistic.
So what happened? Did they finally arrest her?
Yes. They had enough evidence to charge her. In 1985, Genene Jones was convicted for the murder of Chelsea McClellan.
That must have been a relief for Chelsea's family. At least some justice was served.
I'm sure it was. But the story doesn't end there. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, we're picking up where we left off with the truly disturbing case of Genene Jones.
Yeah, it's just hard to wrap my head around how someone in a position of care,
Yeah.
A nurse could actually harm the children she was supposed to be helping.
Yeah. I think that's the question everyone wants answered. Like, what could possibly drive someone to do such a thing?
Right. Is it just pure evil? I mean, is she a monster?
Well, it's not that simple. Unfortunately, human behavior, especially in extreme cases like this, it's complex,
I mean, there's no easy explanation, right?
Right. But there are some psychological theories that might give us some clues,
Okay, so like, what are we talking about?
Well, one of the most common ones that comes up in cases like this is Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Munchausen syndrome. Okay, so isn't that where someone pretends to be sick to get attention?
Right. You're thinking of Munchausen syndrome, but Munchausen syndrome by proxy is different.
Okay, so what's the by proxy part?
Well, by proxy means it's basically happening through someone else. So in this case, the caregiver, let's say a parent is making their child sick or making it seem like they're sicker than they are.
To get attention for themselves.
Exactly. They get attention and sympathy from others for being such a devoted caregiver.
Wow. It's like they need to be seen as the hero.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about that validation.
But isn't it a little different with Genene Jones? I mean, she wasn't saving anyone. She was actually hurting them.
Yeah, you're right. And that's where things get a bit more complicated with the Munchausen by proxy theory.
Okay, so how does it apply to her then?
Well, some experts believe that in more extreme cases of Munchausen by proxy, the caregiver isn't really motivated by attention or sympathy, but by a need for power and control.
So it's more about the thrill of manipulating the situation.
Right, and having power over life and death.
That's a really scary thought.
It is, and it's hard to wrap your head around,
Yeah, like, are there any other theories that might explain what she did?
There are a few. Another possibility is that she was seeking excitement and stimulation.
Like an adrenaline rush?
Remember how some witnesses said she seemed almost excited during those medical emergencies?
Yeah, I remember that detail. It was so strange.
Right. It's possible that she was actually drawn to the chaos and the intensity of those situations?
Because hospitals can be pretty intense places, especially a pediatric ICU.
Exactly. There's a lot of pressure in high-stakes situations. It could have been a trigger for her.
It's like she got a kick out of being in control of who lived and who died.
It's a disturbing thought, but unfortunately, it's not unheard of in cases like this.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, were there any red flags in her past? Anything that might have hinted at this kind of behavior?
Well, there's not a lot of information available about her childhood, but we do know she was adopted.
Okay.
And sometimes early childhood experiences like trauma or neglect can have a big impact on someone's development.
So it's possible that played a role.
It's definitely possible.
What about her adult life? I mean, she was married a bunch of times and even married that younger guy right before she got arrested.
Right, and that kind of instability in her personal life could suggest a pattern of seeking control and validation.
Interesting. So are we saying Genene Jones was a cold-blooded killer or someone who was mentally ill? I mean, it's hard to imagine her being both a caring nurse and a murderer.
I think it's more complicated than that. It's likely a combination of factors. Maybe there were some underlying mental health issues, a need for power and control, and who knows, maybe even some kind of twisted enjoyment of the chaos she created.
It's just chilling to think about.
Yeah, it's a tough case for sure, but it's important to remember the real victims here, the children who lost their lives and their families.
Right. The pain and loss is just unimaginable.
Absolutely. And while we're trying to understand Genene Jones's motivations, we can't forget about the impact her actions had on the healthcare system.
That's true. I mean, did anything good come out of all of this?
Well, in a way, yes. The Genene Jones case led to some important changes in healthcare practices and patient safety.
Really tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me more about the changes that happened because of the Genene Jones case.
Well, it really forced hospitals and medical institutions to take a hard look at patient safety, especially when it came to infants and children.
Makes sense. I mean, they're the most vulnerable.
Right. And so one of the biggest changes was the way they started doing background checks on healthcare workers.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense before this case. I bet background checks weren't as thorough as they should have been.
You're right. It was kind of a wake-up call for the healthcare industry.
So they started doing more in-depth background checks to make sure no one with a shady past could slip through the cracks.
Exactly. They started checking criminal records, verifying credentials, contacting references, really making sure they knew who they were hiring.
That's good to know. That's a really important step in protecting patients.
Absolutely. And another big change was how they handle medications.
Because of what Jones did with the succinylcholine and all that.
Right. They realized they needed much stricter protocols for storing, handling, and disposing of medications, especially high-risk drugs.
So things like double-checking dosages, limiting access to certain medications, and keeping better track of who's using what.
Exactly. All those things make it a lot harder for someone to misuse or tamper with medications.
That's a relief to hear. It sounds like they really tightened things up.
They did. And they also started paying closer attention to patient outcomes, looking for any unusual patterns that might suggest a problem.
So like if a particular nurse or unit had a lot of patients with complications or deaths, they would investigate.
Exactly. It's all about being proactive and using data to protect patients.
It's amazing how one case, as horrible as it was, could lead to so many positive changes.
It really is. And it's a testament to the families of the victims. They fought so hard for justice and to make sure something good came out of this tragedy.
It's inspiring to see how they turned their grief and anger into something positive. A legacy that honors the memory of their children.
Absolutely. Their strength and determination made a real difference.
And it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we can make a difference. We can fight for change and leave the world a little better than we found it.
Well said. And, while the Genene Jones case is a dark chapter in healthcare history, it also teaches us valuable lessons about the importance of vigilance, accountability, and never giving up on the pursuit of justice.
I agree. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly disturbing case, but also one that reminds us of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most unimaginable tragedies. Thanks for listening.